Good morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to our webinar today. My name is Brian, and for those of you who don't know about us, we are a government-owned organization in Singapore that invests in and helps build deep tech startups, talent, and communities. At SG Innovate, our work involves connecting with the global deep tech ecosystem, working with entrepreneurial scientists to bring their innovative research from lab to market, as well as developing deep tech talent. Today's event, the Resurgence of Algal Biotechnology, is presented by SG Innovate and SINERGY. Today, we have a panel of amazing experts who will be sharing their experience in the algal biotech space. I would also like to encourage our audience here today to share their thoughts on this topic and engage with our speakers by using the Q&A box below. And with no further ado, I will now pass the time to Kostas, who will be giving a short introduction to algal biotechnology. Kostas, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Konstantinos Vavitsas. I am the manager of SINERGY, and I am very happy to attend this event today. And it's a topic those of you who know me is close to my heart. I used to be an algae researcher in the past. But before we go to the event, let me please advertise our future upcoming events from SINERGY. On the 8th of April, we have Xin Liang from LanzaTech, who will present her nice research, groundbreaking, I would say, of gas fermentation at large scale. And then on the 26th of April, we have our new SINERGY PI, Sensitive PI, Julius Fredens, who will talk more about his genome engineering projects. You can see our future events and more that will be upcoming in our website. And of course, you can follow us on our social media, Twitter and LinkedIn. But getting back to our algae biotech. So the idea about algae is pretty simple. You have microbes that generally grow on sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide, plus nutrients, of course. And it is a bit strange that the organism that grows essentially on nothing, on resources that are plenty, is not one of the most heavily used biotech organisms. We can see all those organisms have higher biomass over time, of course, not in very short bursts, but you can all relate to algal blooms dominating ecosystems and then trying to actually mitigate the issue. They contain a wealth of natural products, and there are several model species that have been used quite a while in biological research in order to study mostly photosynthesis, but also other aspects of molecular biology. Algae also have a very wide morphological and genetic variety, so there are, I would say, millions of algae species, and we know only a few of them who have properly characterized, and even less so properly studied and grown in the lab setting. They are, when we talk about algae, we can distinguish between prokaryotic algae, cyanobacteria, some people just put them aside, which are bacteria that do photosynthesis essentially, and eukaryotic algae, which fall into so many categories that I won't go into, but you have things like chlorophyta, diatoms, brown algae, and all of them, or many of them, have already some applications in natural production. In the last few years, starting from, I would say, 2010-15, there was an effort of making algae biotech a bit more advanced, and the developments of synthetic biology and use of other equipment like phenomics, like high-throughput screening, like more computer modeling, have given a new, let's say, breadth in the algae sector, which was heavily damaged by the biofuels, let's say, fluke in mid-2010s. But I'll let the speakers talk later about that. And also, what is important is that new business models of algae and where they can be used started coming out. So besides the traditional, algae growing in a desert or in photobioreactors that produce some chemical or some compound, new applications such as textiles, nutraceuticals, or other products started coming up. The idea is that algae are an unexplored and not very well used system that can produce that can be used in several applications: nutraceuticals, pharmaceuticals, textiles, commodity chemicals, bioremediation, and then even more. The question we have, me, community entrepreneurs and investors, is, are they a good biotech host? This is the question that I would like to discuss today, and hopefully have an answer at the end of this session. And with that, I will pass the baton to our panel moderator, Serene Lin from NTU, who will introduce us to the speakers. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. So it's my pleasure this morning to host this panel, and thank you, Kostas, for the good introduction of algae in general as a biosynthetic chassis and a synthetic biology chassis. So I would like to start the panel today by introducing our speakers. I'm not very good introducing people, so I'm gonna ask them to introduce themselves. So let's start with the farthest away from us right now. I think Ari, you are based in LA, somewhere, California.
That's right. Yeah, I'm in California. Thank you, Saren. So yeah, my name's Ari Lippman. I'm a general partner at Mars Bio, which is an early stage venture fund based here in California. We're investing in companies at kind of the inception stage in synthetic biology. Have invested in a couple of different algae companies, so kind of bringing in an investor's perspective to the table. Okay,
great. Looking forward to hear how the venture is going later in the panel. So Naski is the next farthest away individual in this panel.
Hi, thank you very much. And I'm very excited to be here with the panel today. My name is Naski Spanton. I'm the founder and CEO of Vavitsas Algae, and we're currently based in Australia, but expanding very quickly internationally. We program algae to transform the specialty ingredients manufacturing industry, and we've developed a biomanufacturing platform that integrates both natural and biosynthetic products to scale algae at a rate that hasn't been seen before for many different market applications. And lovely to be on the conversation today and give some more insight about what we do as well.
Yeah, thanks, Naski. Yeah, very exciting that knowing that it will be able to scale up, which is a really limitation for commercialization. The last panelist today is our homegrown Sophie Bionutrient representative here, Eugene. Go ahead, Eugene.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I guess a lot of you folks possibly know who I am. For those who don't know who we are, we're Sophie Bionutrient. We're growing microalgae for food ingredients. So our approach will be very different from Naski's. We're trying to make it a commodity for the future protein, future human consumption. So the technology, the approach is totally different. And on top of that, we're expanding into Europe. I'm currently actually in Amsterdam, joining from Amsterdam. So if you guys would like to know more, let's chat after the event. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks all the panels. So I'm just going to kick off here with some background as to why biotech algae algae biotech is the next big thing. So it's photosynthetic, as mentioned before, and there are other photosynthetic microbes that people have been tinkering around with. So what is so unique about algae that would give them this commercial potential? So perhaps Naski or anyone in the panel can jump in.
Yeah, so I think Kostas, well done on the introduction to algae. I think that was fantastic and sets a good foundation for the discussion. Algae is a fantastic microbe that's really been underutilized in really, the existence of human beings on planet Earth. And the major reason for that is we've never really understood the mechanisms in which algae require to grow. And earlier on, we discussed that algae is a photosynthetic organism, and fundamentally it converts light energy into chemical energy to grow. And when you sort of understand how to unpack that, you can understand that every single metabolic process inside of algae is based around that conversion of light energy to chemical energy, and it physically controls the genome in what it can switch on and switch off in how it grows. And the really difficult thing about algae is understanding the environments in which it grows is very, very different to terrestrial plants and how photosynthetic organisms grow on the surface of the planet. And, you know, obviously the major difference there is plants on the surface of the planet get direct sunlight through our atmosphere. But in order for algae to get sunlight, or the light in which it requires to grow, it has to get filtered through this water that makes it do very, very different things to what we as human beings understand light to do. And so we've really been sort of missing the critical components, and there's been huge developments over the last 10 years, both in our understanding of what algae is capable of doing and how diverse it is and how many different species are available and what they can potentially do, but also in the technology available to control light in the way that we need to actually understand what algae requires to grow. And from us here at Provectus, that's really been the missing component in our human beings' ability to understand, firstly, what to give algae in order to allow it to grow and do what it needs to do, but then also understanding what it's then capable of doing and how do we utilize that for commercial applications and really utilize that to scale up in a biomanufacturing sense that allows us then to use algae in this format. So there's a lot of things that have been happening recently that have allowed us to develop in that process, and we're coming into a really exciting time frame.
Yeah, I'll be very interested in learning more about that. I think the limitations on how much light penetrates into media is also a big challenge, I suppose, for algae. So it would be interesting to hear what Perspectives has been doing in the next segment of this talk. So then we all know that algae has been one of the poster child or poster microbe for biofuel production's effort for the last 20 years or so. So then there is definitely something that didn't quite right. And I think you mentioned that there is a lot of challenges that was not addressed before. So I would like to hear from Ari, perhaps, what went wrong there, Ari, in terms of biofuel algae production?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I guess the first thing I would say is timing is really important in all of these new innovations and in starting new companies and startups. So what really, you know, probably the primary thing that caused algae biofuel to fail was related to timing. So this was kind of in the mid 2000s. There was a huge amount of investment in algae biofuel when oil prices were extremely high. So some of the math that these companies were doing was, you know, very much dependent on oil prices staying high. And unfortunately, or fortunately, they didn't. And many of those companies kind of overbuilt and failed in the late 2000s, kind of 2010 timeframe. You know, now we're in a very different time. Oil prices are quite high again. That said, I think the general environment around biofuels has changed a lot. We are seeing obviously the sort of advent of clean energy, the advent of electric vehicles and so on. In the US, there's still a ton of investment in biofuels, primarily in corn-based biofuels and now renewable diesel, which I personally think is quite terrible. So there's a lot of investment still going into these sort of natural or, you know, plant-made oils for biofuels. But I think ultimately all of that stuff will get supplanted by renewable energy and EVs. So we really need to be thinking about what else is algae good for. And there's a whole lot of other things that I think it's much better for.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks so much. That was a very nice overview there. And in terms of rightfully so timing. And again, oil prices up again with all this, what's going on and whether that's going to put algae into the spotlight. But whether that is really another opinion that I would like to hear actually from Eugene. Any thoughts on that? In terms of timing, and is it a good time, and whether we have to look at something else rather than oil?
Yeah, so contrary to Naskit and Konstantinos' comment on the phototrophic, what I think the breakthrough in the last few years of microalgae technology and research is actually really from the dark fermentation. So the heterotrophic strain developed especially for the commodity use. Answering actually one of the audience question is that, you know, the cost possibly may not make sense forever if you keep using light and converting that light into energy for the algae to grow. That kind of growth is just not efficient enough from all the models, all the research papers we gather. The only way to go is fermentation. And quite frankly, on top, just echoing what Ari said, not only the biofuel was developed, but was not in the right timing at the time. They're not heavily using the heterotrophic fermentation production strategy to lower the cost. So I think, heterotrophic fermentation is really the way to go for the algae technology to really open up and be available not just to the nutraceutical and pharmaceutical niche market, but also to the commodity like food ingredient, and even in the future potentially coming back again to the biofuel. But I agree with Ari. I think there's a lot of other alternative energy out there. We don't really have to go back to using microalgae as the biofuel again. Yeah.
Thanks. That's pretty interesting. So I'm just trying to kind of understand here, perhaps many of the audience have the same question. So one of the benefits of having photosynthetic microbes or any or algae for that matter, right, is that they are photosynthetic and they sequester carbon. And in a way, it's a two things in one go, right? So if it's all about dark fermentation, so what is the more benefit of using algae and these photosynthetic microbes then? Sorry if it's a hard question.
The kind of carbon that's fixated by the open pond operation is really limited, in my personal opinion. Nasky may have different opinion, but then that's just my take. But more importantly, if you're growing for commodities, you're talking about lipid, fat, you're talking about carbohydrate, you're talking about protein. All of these three things does not need photobioreaction to happen. All of these three things can happen more efficiently in dark fermentation mode. Nasky, you got more comment on that?
Yeah, I guess, look, I think the way we need to think about this is twofold, and it's not a competitive nature, right? And what I mean by that is there's very unique things that photosynthetic algae can do that fermentation can't do, and absolutely right, lipid production, bulk commodities, bulk proteins. Photosynthetic algae in the state that it's at now is not a viable mechanism to do those bulk products at the price in which we need to be competitive in the market. And what it's going to take to actually drive it into something that is commercially viable is a scale to reach those numbers that are required. And I think this is where biofuels and bulk commodities really come unstuck in using photosynthetic algae at the moment. Is the technology is really in its infancy, and I think there's huge pain points that we can solve using photosynthetic algae and going back to your question earlier, what is photosynthetic algae or photosynthetic organisms more appropriate to do? And when we look at that, you need to really isolate very quickly what exactly is photosynthetic algae's position in the market and which products are more suited to this production platform compared to something in fermentation or using bacteria or using yeast to do. And the fact of that is there's tens of thousands of products which are better suited to photosynthetic production, but they're in areas of pain points which aren't directly in the consumer's forefront of mind. And we certainly believe that over the next 20, 30, 50 years, as the technology reaches a scale of production, you can definitely bring those larger bulk commodities into play. But at the moment, I think I completely agree with Eugene to a degree with carbon sequestration, open pond cultivation. As human beings, we've only been successful at about 8 to 12 different species actually grown in direct sunlight anywhere in the world. And the reason for that is the vast majority of algae cannot handle that type of light to grow. And it's extremely risky. You're open to the environment. It's a very risky business to be in. And so we take a very different view of bringing that into a closed system and really understanding what are the molecular triggers that are required to grow any species of algae for any target compound. And when you open up the mind in doing that, you can then identify which products algae is more suited to do in phototrophic culture. Because now we have the understanding of looking at all of these different species, we can really quickly identify which ones are more suited, and it goes across many different market verticals. A huge proponent of what we're doing in our pipeline at the moment is in the food and beverage space. Specialty ingredients that are found in plants and specialty plants, flavorings, specialty additives, these types of compounds that are really high value, but they also have significant pain points in the market, whether it be supply chain problems, performance problems, or cost problems. These are areas where we can convert synthetic products across to naturals if we have the right technology to first identify which species is capable of doing what we want it to do, and really working out and fine-tuning the requirements for that algae to do it naturally. And if it can't do it naturally, what's the closest species that can do it? And then we can use synthetic biology to just tweak the little last 5% to then make it capable of doing what it's needed to do. So it's thinking about it in a really different context, and we can have a significant impact on market verticals across many different market verticals. But it's about really finding the right products for the production platform and sticking into that niche, and not being a competitor to fermentation, but being a complementary platform that can do the things that fermentation can't. And I think if we identify that really clearly, we can really solve some significant problems globally, both in markets and supply chains, but also, the problems that we're facing as existential threats now in the carbon capture that we need to do to actually transform our production systems. And so it's not really a choice for us to say, we're not going to look at photosynthetic algae or photosynthetic mechanisms. We really don't have a choice. And I think the opportunity that we have here is so significant that if we do take another look at algae and we look at it through a different lens, and we look at it holistically, how do we utilize this? I think it has the opportunity to really transform the way we look at production systems as a whole, and really convert some of those niche products or specialty ingredients and solve real pain points.
Okay, thanks so much, Naski. So I think it's the identification of host product compatibility is basically key here. I would like to hear I think that rightfully so, food is a natural thing. What else is there, Ari? Perhaps you can jump in and then tell us, what have you seen in the venture world in terms of productions of, using algae as a host?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is kind of divided into a few different classes. At the super premium end, you have pharmaceutical products. There's a number of companies that are focused on using algae as a production platform for pharmaceuticals. Then you have maybe more specialty ingredients, which sounds like what Vavitsas is focused on, dyes, higher value components of, say, plant-based foods, for example, maybe cosmetics, some of these higher per kilogram costs, but not quite as high as pharma. And then you have commodity products, which are obviously massive markets. I mean, I think the plant-based protein area is particularly interesting. It's just a massive consumer shift in terms of what people are eating today compared to the past 20, 30 years. We're shifting away from kind of carbohydrate heavy diets into protein heavy diets. And we're seeing an increase in meat consumption, but we're also seeing a huge increase in plant-based protein consumption. And today, it's coming from soy and peas and a number of products, or a number of ag products that aren't super sustainable. So if algae was actually able to sort of chip away at the plant-based protein market, that would be very interesting. But again, you have very different cost pressures and different sort of economic dynamics in these different categories.
Right. So that's a really good point there, right? So it's a lot of drive going toward plant-based protein. And I think that in a way, if we think about it, algae is sort of like the precursor of maybe the multicellular organism. So that angle is like, why not? We didn't really think about it before. So that obviously bring us to the food market here. Eugene, would you like to kind of tell us the next big thing that Sophie Nutrients is looking at as plant-based alternative protein here?
Yeah. So looking at the question from the audience, and also that, what we have experienced in the last few years. What I can say is that, let me back a little bit. There are two fossil records discovered back in 2020. The first fossil record confirmed that the first plant on this planet was a descendant of a microalgae. That's the first one. The second set of fossil record, also discovered during the pandemic in 2020, confirmed that the first animal even is a descendant of the microalgae. Now from these two fossil records, you can pretty much say that microalgae is the genesis of all the living things on this planet. That's how nutritious, that's how wonderful microalgae is. And folks, please understand, microalgae we're talking about is different from the macroalgae, which is the seaweed and kelp. That's the sea plants in the ocean. That's different. We're talking about the microorganism in the ocean. So these are the truly precious gold. And that's why we want to bring this to the world. Companies like us, like NUSCs, you know. But then again, here is the question that, like one of the audience questions mentioning about. Why microalgae cannot be used on a commodity scale? Because why? Using phototrophic, using sunlight to convert microalgae to convert light to grow. You got this heavy cutter because of the photosynthesis process. You got this heavy smell. Thanks again to the photosynthesis process, they produce a lot of fatty acids. Now, in the dark fermentation, you have none of that problem. Once you get rid of that, your fat, your carbohydrate, your protein becomes much favorable in terms of its color, much favorable in terms of its flavor as well. On top of that, production efficiency is 100 times more efficient, like I just told you. Now, someone mentioning about the sugar cost. Well, no, actually, microalgae does not require sugar. What microalgae needs in a dark fermentation mode is actually carbon and nitrogen. And especially, they need a lot of carbon. And think about it. Where can you get the carbon? There's a lot of things you can get carbon from. It doesn't have to come from sugar. It can be coming from, like in our technology, the Spain grain. Spain grain from beer brewery. And if you are Muslim, we can use the Spain grain from Nestle Milo. Nestle had this big factory in Singapore, Jurong. They throw away close to 20 tons of Spain grain every month to the landfill. Think about it. If we can use that to grow microalgae for alternative protein, how wonderful can that be? So sky is not even the limit. I always talk about, you know, this type of technology, especially using the heterotrophic. We can even take this technology to Mars. Because what? You know, when there is water, you can find microalgae. And guarantee you, if we can find microalgae on that planet, on planet Mars, we can possibly copy or duplicate what we know here on planet Earth and do the same thing on Mars and grow microalgae for foods for the cellular, for the astronauts over there. And that's how expandable, that's how duplicatable this technology can be in the future.
Very interesting, Eugene, thanks. Inoculating other places with photosynthetic organisms, particular algae, might be an interesting challenge there for colonizing other planets. Okay, so I'm going to try to continue with this exciting development on algae. And then, so obviously we have been talking about the production. It's a big thing, right? So then we have two very, two experts here who have been looking at scale up. And then one is Naski. So you mentioned earlier in the discussion that you have this really cool scale up production for algae. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So ultimately, our company is, as a biomanufacturing platform, we provide services to companies where we can do novel product development and then scale that all the way up to large scale contract manufacturing in partnership or otherwise to deliver products at scale for very large markets in different market segments, from food and beverage to pharmaceuticals, animal therapeutics to agriculture. And the key component of what we focused on early in the company is really solving the pain point of scale up. And before you can think about integrating, fantastic synthetic biology technologies into algae, you've first got to solve the problem of how do we get this A, to scale, and B, controllable in a GMP environment, so in a good manufacturing practice environment that keeps sterility to your product so that you can actually have control over it. So a lot of what we've done is actually build a platform where it's not only in the R&D side of developing these products, but scaling that up in very large scale bioreactors in a fully closed system that runs 24 hours a day, 365 a year, all year round, right? And what this allows us to do as well, integrating fully automated technologies from cell analytics to controlling bioreactors, literally controlling all of the inputs going in, from lighting to gas transfer to nutrient input, temperatures, everything that goes into growing algae to create the perfect environment for these algae to grow. And then the big difficulty that we had to overcome was how do you not only control all of the inputs, but how do you then harvest all of the outputs? How do you gain the knowledge of what's happening to the algae in real time in a microscopic organism that needs 100 times magnification? And so what we focused on was building all of the technologies around that, from circuitry to electronics to big data servers to integrating machine learning and AI into the platform. And ultimately what that's ended up with us being able to do is create this biomanufacturing platform that can run fully automated through a cloud-enabled platform that continues to learn in real time what the algae, and it doesn't matter what species or what target compound you're looking for, but it learns in real time how to improve the productivity by changing little things within the production system. And so what we then are enabled to do is be able to build these facilities really quickly anywhere in the world and run them on a completely remote enabled platform. And let's be realistic about this, the key difficulty in growing algae, when you're talking about photosynthesis, the sheer amount of variables that you have to deal with in light, gas transfer, temperature, the micronutrients, we're talking about an infinite number of variables to try and control. And a human being is not capable of doing this. So really, to enable this as a large-scale manufacturing, we had to take the human out. And we had to say, how do we build a fully automated platform that can control everything going in, understand what's happening in real time, and then make changes on the run. And by doing that, now we can scale this at a rate that hasn't been seen before. And we have absolute control over everything inside that facility. And we can build very large GMP facilities for everything from food grade products to therapeutics products. And it's now scalable. And ultimately, the inputs into those facilities are quite literally carbon dioxide from atmospheric air and light that we're delivering into the system. And the byproduct is clean water and oxygen. And so now we're looking at a production system that solves huge amounts of environmental problems, but it doesn't make any difference unless we can deliver products to customers at a price point in which they're going to pay for them. So it all comes back to what we're originally talking about, is how do you pinpoint the perfect products that are best suited to this platform and then allow those to lead the development of this technology. And coming behind that in 10, 20, 30 years time, we'll reach a scale of production where we've got an entire ecosystem of manufacturing built. And that then enables us a scale of manufacturing that makes the commodities viable then. So it's about being really commercially understanding of what the nuances are with the production platform that you've got and how that relates to your customer in real time. Can we provide a value proposition to our customers or not? And if we can, great. Let's scale that as quickly as we possibly can and get it into customers' hands really, really quickly.
Right. Thanks, Naski. So basically, take the human out. You will need a lot of optimization and scale from the current biotech processes, and that is driven by the end product that you would like to have. So I think that's a very good point there. I would like to actually understand the specific so Eugene, perhaps you have a very important note there in terms of scaling up. You have been very successful in doing that in Singapore. Would you elucidate a little bit about that?
Yeah, I saw a lot of discussions about cost. Some people even are saying in the chat, in the Q&A, saying that algae is never going to be a real business. I bet differently. We have financial model done by professionals, done by academic together, proven that we can get our production cost down to under $3 per kilo. Now, this $3 per kilo is not low enough, but bear in mind, this is not even the largest scale yet. And we're able to achieve $3 per kilo of production cost. Now, that $3 may not be allowing us to compete with soy directly, say for example, but we're on par with pea protein today in the market already. And think about that. The market we can create is more than hundreds of millions of dollars already. Now, if we can even scale up and create more demand, I think it's just a matter of time that we're gonna be price parity with soy. Because don't forget, soy pricing, if you look at the price index of soy, is slowly but surely creeping up. Why? Because thanks to the global warming, thanks to the fact that we're running up the rainforest, deforest, and also thanks to the fact that we have more and more people want to consume more meat, meaning more protein. Not just we human beings want to eat the protein, the plant-based protein. The animals we're eating also want to eat the plant-based protein. So potentially this microalgae protein someday could even replace soy in our point of view, in our vision. And so when the soy price going up like this and our production cost going down like this, and when the two line crossed, hallelujah, we're gonna take over the world and we're not gonna become the soy of the future in the market. So for those naysayers, I hope you guys can listen to my message. This will come sooner than later, in my personal opinion, especially from the model we have established.
Thank you, Eugene, for the very, very bright and optimistic outlook there. I would like to hear from Ari, though. We haven't heard from him for a while. But what is your thought on moving forward with algae investment and in venture world?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the biggest challenges is thinking about scale at the early phases of companies and startups. In particular, a lot of the ideas that we see that are kind of more at the academic stage, at the very early stage, there's sort of an infatuation with technology or with IP. Say you have a new way of engineering a strain, or you've engineered a strain to make X protein at 1 liter scale. That's all well and good, but really the challenge comes when you try to reach commercial scale. So I think, if in the space where we're operating, looking at early stage companies, there has to be kind of a clear path to commercial scale, which is, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of liters or more. So really thinking about that long-term strategy and long-term viability of your production process at the outset is really important. There's going to be lots of unknowns for sure, but as investors, we want to have confidence that you can at least attempt to solve those problems. So I think that's really important. The other thing that I would say is, talking to you all from Singapore and some of the government efforts there, I think there's still a significant kind of valley of death in between an academic project and a viable startup. And a lot of that has to do with infrastructure and physical sort of lab space, pilot facilities, stuff like that. So I would definitely encourage, government or federal investment in production capacity, even at like the 100-liter scale or something like that. Maybe you guys already have that in Singapore, but that's a really nice de-risking process to have before the company really gets started, to understand whether or not these processes are viable. So I think exploring how that valley of death can be, bridged at the early stage would be really useful.
Thanks, Ari. That was my next question, actually, to know where we should get funding from, because as an academic myself, we are faced with the same problem. Trying to push it to commercial scale, we need funding. And then none of the academic funding would allow us to do that. Startup ventures would like to see something that is de-risked, like you said. So if I'm kind of summarizing correctly, we need government to come in right at that point at which we know we can make it at the 10-liter scale, but we don't know if it's 100-liter would work. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have, we do not have infrastructure like this in the US, although we do have it for more conventional fermentation. There's sort of demo scale fermentation facilities affiliated with many universities. A lot of those were funded from kind of some of the biofuels boom back in the early 2000s. And luckily they have this infrastructure that's still there, and now they can use it for better products. But yeah, I think having these kind of like demo scale up facilities, including downstream processing, which is probably a much larger challenge than people are thinking about. Maybe it's one thing to grow the organism, but then what do you do with it after you're done growing it? Really need work there. And I think, federal funding would be a potential way to tackle that issue.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you. So I think you would like to answer?
I think that's a fantastic point to bring up. We sort of sit on the opposite side of that, and what I'm going to highlight is, what you've explained there in the pain point of no pilot scale and then no large scale. There quite literally is no scalable platform for photosynthetic algae. And I think what this initiates is we've just identified one of the major pain points in biomanufacturing here. And it's actually, we don't believe it's the responsibility of governments to take ownership over that. It's the responsibility of startups to identify that this is actually the major pain point in the market here, and how do we solve this? And it's about then providing the solutions to the market and going, you know what, we actually can build technology, and there is a viable company here to build this infrastructure to allow academics like yourself to test this out and drive it to market. And so if you start with what the commercial goals are and the pain points within the market and how do you solve those for customers, then we can build an ecosystem around it. And absolutely, there's a lot of infrastructure for fermentation. There's next to no infrastructure for photosynthetic algae, but I do believe that there's a huge opportunity for commercialization in that sector alone. And if we allow commercial institutions or commercial organizations to think differently and say, look, actually, what is the pain point here? We've got all of these universities working on synthetic biology and looking at the organism, but none of them can scale from 1 liter, right? Everyone gets it to small micro amounts. Who's actually doing the next legwork up? And there's a massive opportunity there. And I guess this is where we sort of step into that portfolio and say, look, we're going to solve this problem. We're going to create an ecosystem around us, and we're going to provide solutions at every point of the supply chain. So in the future, you as an academic, you don't need to worry about what the large scale production looks like. Leave it to a professional that has built a platform that enables you to do it. And in doing that, now we can really build an ecosystem where photosynthetic algae is commercially viable. But I think it's up to entrepreneurs to take that opportunity and go, where is the opportunities here and what do we need to focus on first?
Yeah, thanks. That's a very, very interesting point there. Eugene, I just saw that you unmuted yourself. Would you like to add to that?
Can I comment on that real quick? You know, I think Ari and Naskit just brought up pretty important points. You know, the kind of scale up assistance is nowhere to be seen in Asia and possibly even North America. That's the reason why I'm in Amsterdam right now. In Asia for 2 years, our process can never go anywhere up more than 200 liter. Once I landed in the Netherlands, all of a sudden we scaled up to 10,000 liter. Think about that. And talking about investment, if you don't have a startup that can scale up their technology, like Ari said, to a commercial degree, who are so dare to invest money in your startup? No one, no way. And so that's why, in terms of infrastructure, I don't think it's the investment that's the concern. It's more the ecosystem that's lacking in Europe, in Asia and also in North America. Because quite frankly, look at the pandemic. Why Europe is always the leading economies developing all the pharmacies? Because they're the genesis of all the pharmaceutical technology, and that's where all the biotech ecosystem players are located. Right here in Europe, I can easily find a contract manufacturer. I can easily find a designing house to design my factory. I can even easily find a scale-up help in between the contract manufacturer and the lab. And I can get all the talents easily. Where all these resources are not available anywhere in Asia. Not so much available in North America, because I run into quite a few startups from the States and Canada here in Europe. And by that, you can see the reason why.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. I think that I, as an academic, also face the same problem, and I have firsthand. So I'm really glad that this is not a single academic lab's problem, but it's many people actually have the same problem. And hopefully, by putting that up there, there will be some interest in actually plugging that gap and then providing or building an ecosystem around here in Southeast Asia and Asia in general. So I would like to now kind of pause the panel sessions and then address some of the questions that the audience have put up on the Q&A. So if you have actually seen that while you were waiting for your turn to speak, feel free to just jump in when I bring this up, okay? So seaweed, which is the macroalgae, you did mention it wasn't really what we are talking about here today, but it's an interest of the audience. They have like 3 votes. Is it financially actually viable to do it in Singapore, and who are the largest players? Question from Yining at HP. Anybody wants to take that question?
I don't know any player with seaweed. Naske, you go ahead.
Yeah, I can jump in after over a decade in Southeast Asia and in these industries. Look, I think seaweed is a fantastic opportunity as another complementary system. It has unique abilities to do different types of products. It's relatively simple to cultivate when you've got the system down in open ocean. I'm not too sure about the ocean environment around Singapore, but after 15 years in large-scale aquaculture and in marine environments, I think it's a huge opportunity that needs to be tapped into. Asia is the largest, production industry in the world for seaweed, so I think it's only natural that it's done. But I think if you start really delving into the larger opportunities, I think the downstream processing and the biomanufacturing of that in the back end needs to be developed out, and what I see is huge opportunities for development in those areas that will make seaweed far more viable in multiple different markets, not just as a single commodity-based product for agar or carrageenan. So yes, I do absolutely think it's a solution for the future. Obviously, very different to what we do with microalgae.
Okay, so again, it's about host and product compatibility. There is very important.
Although, Siren, I must comment because I studied macroalgae before. Heavy metal pollution is a key problem because the ocean today, thanks to human activity, is so polluted everywhere. It's hard to source a macroalgae that doesn't have the heavy metal issue, especially California just passed Prop 65. It's a very strict heavy metal standard. And so a lot of macroalgae I previously tried to source, just wouldn't pass that new regulatory standard. So you can imagine with the macroalgae, with the growing condition in the ocean, it's really hard to keep all the pollutants out. So that's the only problem that I encountered previously with macroalgae.
Okay, that's an interesting point there. All right, so moving on to the next question here. From a commercial point of view, when we're trying to get specific metabolites like lipids or carbohydrates or proteins via heterotrophic fermentation, what is that major pain point there for that heterotrophic fermentation? You mentioned it's like the way to go, but then what is the pain point?
The pain point we're trying to solve, like I said, through fermentation is the color issue, the flavor issue, the production cost issue, and more importantly, through precision fermentation, we're able to achieve functional properties. If you're just growing your microalgae out in the sun, God is the God in that open pond. And there's no way for you to manipulate the growing condition of the microalgae. In the dark fermentation tank, we are the God. We can decide the growing condition of the microalgae, changing the temperature, changing the pH level, changing the feedstock, changing the time it stays in the fermentation. There's a lot of factors you can play around to get the special functional properties, especially application, meaning, say, for example, emulsification, foaming, water binding activities, or fat binding ability, those kind of things that you can easily manipulate or achieve through dark fermentation. But if you grow the microalgae in the open pond, like I said, you're in the mercy of God, and God has its own mind for sure.
Well put. Okay, I think that we would like to know some more questions here. The problem with the synthetic biology in a timeline to the market is hampered by regulatory issue. Like you mentioned, safety and regulatory. Would like to hear Ari's point in terms of what this how important is it to venture capitalists to look at that in a very early stage, or
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. We also invest in pharmaceutical and biotech products, which have obviously probably the highest regulatory burden of any product, and something like 10 years to get from idea to market. So those are just factors that we kind of incorporate into our thinking around the level of investment and the value of the company and the prospects. But to be honest, if you're making a food ingredient from algae that is somewhat equivalent to an existing ingredient on the market, getting generally recognized as safe sort of certification isn't really that bad. I mean, it's maybe, I'm sure the other gentleman on the call could discuss this quite quickly, but it compared to making a drug, getting a new food ingredient onto the market is maybe a year or two, something like that. So in reality, it's actually kind of a nice, for us, it's a hedge in our portfolio where we have some things that are a new gene therapy that's going to take at least 10 years and may or may not work. And then we have a company that's making a new food ingredient or a new dye or something like that, and they'll probably know whether or not it's selling within a few years. So I think that's just kind of something we keep in mind. And, I think the regulatory environment seems somewhat favorable for new food ingredients, especially in places, maybe like Singapore.
Yeah, certainly. So then we don't have to show, right off the bat that it's going to be safe, but it would be a process that would be considered through the venture. Okay, that's good to know. Okay, questions here, a little bit more technical. Just wondering if any of you from Navid here from Murdoch University looking to see biofermentation option of algae, and then assuming that the fermentation would be negative. So I'm just reading it off. I would be interested would be interesting to see the PBR versus open pond options, and wonder if there is any, if Nusky particularly have looked into this.
Yeah, so just to clarify, that was in regards to bioremediation.
See bioremediation option of algae.
I think you mean carbon capture, basically.
Yeah,
Carbon
capture. Yeah. So, I mean, we have a firm belief in our photosynthetic platform in doing direct carbon capture, both from atmospheric carbon, but also in injecting liquid carbon dioxide into our systems that are coming from waste streams from different waste stream production systems, such as fertilizer plants or concrete manufacturing as well. We've proven in one of our lead products that we are carbon negative. And so I think there's huge opportunity once you scale up. I think there's the valley of death, coming back to Ari earlier, I think it's a fantastic point where when you're bringing a new technology to market, you've got to get past that valley of death. And ultimately our focus has been on, in order to get past that, you've got to have customers that are going to want to pay for what you've got. Now, we absolutely believe that our technology will change the world in how we perceive carbon capture in production systems. But in order to get there, we tend to take a very commercial road up front. And so if we can develop products and get them to scale very, very quickly, then you can get to a point where there's really, for us, it's not really a point of doing a life cycle analysis on carbon capture at 27 milliliters or 1 liter capacity. That doesn't make any difference to anyone as far as I'm concerned. We really try and push it to a scale of 2,000 liters, 200,000 liters. And once we're at that point, we know absolutely what all the inputs are, and we're proving that it is carbon negative, and we're sequestering quite a significant amount. But even in terms of global scale, it's really our belief that one facility is not going to do what we need. We need hundreds, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of facilities producing hundreds of thousands of products that you as the consumer, you don't need to choose whether it's environmentally friendly or not. You're choosing it because it's higher performance and it's at a cost parity basis. And when we get to that point, that's where the shift transition is, where we can actually have lots and lots of facilities pumping out products, and we're having a significant impact on the planet. So from my perspective, I absolutely believe in 20, 30 years time, if we continue down the trajectory that we're on, that we can have a significant impact on carbon capture across our production platform. Absolutely.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that, Nusky, in terms of how much are we expecting to sequester carbon from using this kind of bioprocess? We're talking about 10,000 liters, right?
So we've got 2 facilities here at the moment. We're building a 200,000 litre facility as we speak, and we're looking to scale that to an additional 5 million litre facility next year as well. So multiple facilities coming online. The simple answer to that question is every product and every algae species is completely different to each other. Some species sequester huge volumes of carbon dioxide, but they may not be suitable for particular target compounds. So each one is thought about individually to another. We've got a colouring coming through for the plant-based protein market that performs the same as Impossible's heme product, for instance, but completely GMO-free, natural product. And we're looking at around about 3.5 kilos of carbon dioxide per kilo of finished product. But that can be highly variable depending on the cost of the production of those goods at the end at scale. So it can go up significantly or down significantly, but what we do know is anywhere from between sort of 1.8 kilos per kilo of product up to 4 to 5 kilos per kilo of product, depending on what your harvest rates are, what your daily consumptions are. These things can be highly variable.
Thank you so much. So we have like 5 minutes left right now. Thank you. This is very, very nice and very interesting panels here. I really enjoyed this. I would like to just ask maybe one more question to all around for everyone here. What are the red flags for investors moving forward? Any last thoughts on that? Should investors go and founders go into algae and what moving forward?
Eugene, Ari, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I wonder if the algae startup guys want more investment in this industry. I think so. I mean, yes, I do think for me, one of my the drum I keep beating is about infrastructure, and I think we need definitely investors who are more comfortable with sort of capital investments in physical infrastructure. Typically, VCs shy away from that. They want their 1000x unicorn software virtual startups. But if we really want to change the world, we need to make things in the physical world. So I think I would definitely say I'm excited about a lot of the things happening in the infrastructure side, whether it's hardware, automation, large scale, actual real estate investments in manufacturing facilities. So I think we need to, put pressure on people to be investing in large scale infrastructure as well as those early stage startups.
Okay, thanks. Nasty?
Yeah, I mean, we're all in. I think the opportunity here is significant. I think some of the red flags are, as in all early technologies coming to market. I think the key is focused on commercialization and really cutting through what's real and what's not real and looking at numbers at scale. And if founders and startup organizations really focus on what the commercial outcomes are and solving the pain points to customers, this can really go very, very quickly. And I think VCs, they're only as good as the startup that's in front of them. And realistically, a company needs to be commercially viable. VCs don't just invest money for the hell of investing money, right? And in order to generate return, people need to generate money. And so if you're solving a critical pain point in the market, that's always going to happen. So I think from our side, we're really optimistic about the future, and where we sit is we want millions of algae companies, not just a handful across the planet. And when we do that, and if we're able to enable that to happen, this is where things really start to become exciting, and we can really change the course of production platforms across the world. So I'm really excited about the next 3 to 5, 10 years of development of where we're going.
Okay, thanks, Nasty. Eugene, please.
Yes, this is what we found out. If you look at the whole microorganism world, you got companies, multinationals, you got a lot of universities working on yeast, working on bacteria, working on fungi. You got a lot of research institutes, a lot of companies have thousands or if not tens of thousands of database or library on these microorganisms. But what's missing is the fact that none of them, or at least very few of them, are working on microalgae. Mm-hmm. This is the reason why it opens up a lot of opportunity for smaller guys like us. Because why? For the big companies, microalgae present a huge barrier. There's so many things for the huge companies to come across and to be able to focus study on that or researching on that. Whereas smaller guys like us, we have no such barriers. And guess what? Microalgae turns out to be a lot more superior than any of the other microorganisms I was just talking about. Not only because they are under-researched, but also they are more nutrient dense. And on top of that, they have more varieties. They are estimated at least 1 million different species of microalgae
All right.
in the world. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much. So just to summarize everything that we have just said here, the heterotrophic cultivation is important for algae moving forward. Everybody here is all in for the algae. The host and product, compatibility is important. Scale up, scale up, scale up. I keep hearing scale up. Precision fermentations would be the next technology development that will be required for these scaling up. And then rather than just relying on sunlight, support from the different funding agencies to plug that gap between academia and industry is a really lifelong challenge that really needs to be addressed here. So with that, thank you so much for the panelists. I'll pass the floor back to Kostas, and thank you.
Brian, you want to say the goodbye words?
Yeah, thanks
But
for
for my
Kostas.
part, sorry, I would like to thank everyone for the very nice discussion, very lively discussion. And thank you for the audience for the very intriguing questions that kickstarted a lot of nice topics.
Okay, thanks, Kostas. Thank you as well to all our speakers here today for your insightful and knowledgeable discussion. I think I can speak on SG Innovate's behalf to say that it was a pleasure to have a group of star-studded experts like yourselves here today, sharing your insights on such an important topic. Special thanks to Kostas and the team at SINERGY as well for your help with putting this event together. Unfortunately, we weren't able to cover all of your questions due to time constraints, but I would also very much like to thank our audience for engaging with us and sending in your questions. For our audience today, do also take note that we'll be sending out a post-event email with all the important information you may need, including a recording for this webinar, so do keep an eye out for that. And with that, we have come to the end of our webinar today. Thank you all for spending your Tuesday afternoon with us. And on behalf of SG Innovate, I would like to wish you all a great week ahead, and we look forward to seeing you again at our next event. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much, everybody.